Chandak, a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, and I'm honored to serve as the Master of Ceremony for today's event. A warm welcome to each and every one of you who has joined us. The title for today's seminar is Geopolitics and Geoeconomics, Democratic Dividend to Demographic Dividend. After the Second World War, global politics and economics have been balanced by the democratic dividend, benefiting developing economies in economic conflicts. The end of the Cold War with the collapse of the Soviet Union shifted this balance. Now, with no clear second pole in this multipolar world, a new focus emerges: the demographic dividend. Developing nations are seeing a shift in power as they capitalize on their young populations. The demographic dividend now has a limited role and has been replaced by the demographic dividend. However, the phenomenon has not been much explored by contemporary economists. Today's seminar explores the underlying analytics of this new phenomenon in the field of geopolitics. The speaker for today's seminar is Professor Manoj Pant. He is a visiting professor at the Department of Economics, Shivnadar University. He holds a doctoral degree from Southern Methodist University, USA, and completed his education at prestigious institutions like St. Stephen's College and the Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. Professor Pant has contributed to about 40 publications in international refereed journals. He is a frequent writer on economic policy issues for esteemed newspapers such as the Economic Times, Financial Express, and Mint Business. His areas of expertise include international trade theory, foreign investment, competition policy, and the WTO. We are pleased to have you, sir. The
Uh,
chair, the chair for today's session is Dr. Sanjay Baru, founder trustee of the Forum for National Security Studies, India, and a distinguished fellow at the United Services Institution of India and Center for Air Power Studies. He has held prominent roles such as media advisor to former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and director for geoeconomics and strategy at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, London. He has been a member of India's National Security Advisory Board. Dr. Baru is also a prolific author, with recent publications including The New Cold War, Henry Kissinger and the Rise of China, and Journey of a Nation, 75 Years of the Economy. We extend our gratitude to you for joining us, sir. Before I hand over to the chair, a quick reminder for all participants to adhere to some housekeeping rules. During the presentation, all participants will be muted. You may post your questions in the chat box or raise your hand during the interactive session. After the presentation, you will be called upon to unmute yourself and ask questions. Please remember to mention your name and affiliation when posting your questions. I now hand over to the chair to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Dr. Sanjay Parekh.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chandak. It's a pleasure to chair this talk by Dr. Manoj Pant. I'm not going to stand between you and Dr. Pant. I've been asked to give some opening remarks, but I think I'd rather listen to him, listen to his presentation, and offer my own comments after he's finished his presentation. So, Manoj, over to you. I will wait to make my comments after your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. And nice to hear from you again, Sanjay. It's been a long time. Similarly, Alka, we haven't met for quite some time. Okay, I hope I can finish in 35, 40 minutes. And frankly, I'll be honest, I'm more used to face-to-face presentations than these web things.
Well, let me say 35 minutes is what you've been allotted.
Okay.
So, I'll give you 2-3 minutes more.
Please. We can always. In fact, what I will do is I will try and summarize first what I will do. So if I don't get to something, then people know, well, that's what you get to. Okay, what I'm going to argue is the following. I'm going to argue that there have been phases in economic development right from 1950 till now and continuing. And correspondingly, there have been phases in political development. And of course, that's nothing new, but there has been an interplay between them which has been mediated by what we have seen is the democratic dividend. I will argue that once the democratic dividend disappeared because of various historical Nothing new has emerged. So we are in an unstable position right now because my view is that the Cold War, which I think is very important in our history, created a nice trade-off between the economics and the politics. That trade-off has now disappeared. We are in a different world today, but I believe that the trade-off or the if you want to call it the old Cold War, will be replaced by a new kind of balancing factor, and that will be the emerging economies, not for historical reasons, but for reasons related to demographics and economics. Okay, so let me start from there. It's still a lot of things, more something which I think history student might find it worthwhile to look at a later date. Okay, now let's see. Now look at the first phase which I look at is the global economic development phase from 1950 to 1980. That is following the Second World War and the creation of international institutions like the World Bank, Bretton Woods, and so on and so. Now, what are the main features of this economic development? Very important. This was followed the recession of 30s. In the 1930s, as many of you will know, there was a very long recession, about 3 or 4, 5 years. The main indications were fall in prices and employment. Employment was down to about 25% at this time. Uh, One of the things that the 30s taught everyone was that in the situation of high unemployment due to a global recession, due to a decline in global trade, anyone who follows what is called beggar than able policies, I cut my tariff, I raise my tariff to keep your goods out, you raise your tariff to keep my goods out. This is no end to this. And the problem with this, if you want to call it beggar than able policy, is not what it does, but the fact that when you reach a particular level of low international exchange, there is no incentive for any country to start the process again. There is no question, no incentive economics wise for unilateral reversal of policy. And you need some kind of global mechanism. In a sense, you can say Keynesianism applied an international mechanism, needed a global coordination mechanism, which we got through institutions like the GATT, WB, IMF. In fact, since Second World War is the maximum amount of global monitoring of development that we have ever seen, which followed the experience after the 1930s. Now, at the same time as the economic knew this first phase was beginning, there was the political issues which came up following the World War II. On the one side, we had the Marshall Plan. Now, the Marshall Plan, without getting details, was nothing but a US plan to reconstruct the countries of Europe and, in fact, Asia, which were devastated by the second plan, physically devastated. And the US was the only one in a position to build up the industrial development that was required. The opposite alliance, of course, which emerged also after that was, of course, the Comecon. I'll come to the Warsaw Pact later on. But the Comecon was the emerging East, if you want to call it, communism-based group that came up, based, of course, obviously on the Russia of those days, the Soviet Union. And that is what the development of the Comecon was, a kind of a, if you want to call it, commonwealth of all the communist-linked states linked to the Russia. So we had these two opposing economics and two opposing political alliances. Now, GATS, in at least for the non-communist countries, was extremely successful. GATT, as you know, was a method by which countries had to unilaterally agree on reducing their tariffs in a multilateral setting. They all agreed that no one violate the agreement they have to cut tariffs. It was quite successful. 1950 to 1975, there was 8% real growth in world trade, which is unprecedented. It's never happened. Well, once more it happened, but very limited. Very high growth. And there's no doubt that today the situation of countries like Southeast Asia, Japan, and East Asia and South Korea was entirely due to their benefit due to the high growth of world trade at that time. Uh, Now, politically, it was easy to implement. That's a very important factor because technically, GATT was not a voluntary, was not a mandatory agreement, voluntary. The first GATT of 1948. It was a volunteer. If you wanted to be in it, could join. Don't have to. India did. Many countries, including Japan and South Korea, I think, did not. But the USA was able to push it. Why? because the US could argue, US, you see, now this is what I always believe is extremely important example of real politics. Who are the US's biggest technical military enemies at that time? Well, Germany and Japan in particular, and Russia. Now, what the US did, that they wanted to make sure countries like, industrially strong countries like Germany and Japan would be part of the what we might call the non-communist alliance. And so, in fact, during the GATT rounds from starting one to start six, the USA actually gave tariff concessions, huge tariff concessions, rather than getting tariff concessions to countries to ensure that they allowed Germany and Japan to become part of the a set of GATT countries. So it was a way of getting, take your enemies and make them part of the alliance. Very successful because this Marshall Plan was extended to all these countries. Germany's growth right up to 80 was entirely based on the industrial regeneration due to the Marshall Plan. And they were really, all of course, as we all know, became part of this, if you want to call it, non-communist alliance. Of course, Russia remained outside. So it was easy to implement GATT, even though it was voluntary, because it was in a sense of USA would make countries an offer they could not refuse. You want to come into our country, you want to sell to us, by the same thing going on today. This is what you have to do. You have to cut your tariffs, and you also have to cut these tariffs and also start trading a lot with Germany and Japan, which many may not have wanted to do at that time. In a sense, in economics, the world was unipolar. There's no doubt about that because of the strength of the Marshall Plan and the weakness of the European and the other economies. So that's the situation in the first plan. Now, trying to go as quickly as I can. Now comes the next crisis. I'm going to come to a few more political issues then. So we have these two political formations, the communist formation based on the Soviet Union and the non-communist based on USA driving the world and economics through its Marshall Plan, and of course, Comecon driving the communist country. Now, here is the next crisis comes during this huge economic development in 50 to 80, the dollar crisis of the 1970s and the oil crisis. Let me just finish the oil crisis one sentence. In 1971, the price of oil was roughly about $2 a barrel. It went to $32 a barrel by 1979. The shortage of substitutes for oil in the short run meant that the developed countries in particular had a severe contraction, fiscal contraction. One of the consequences of that was that by the 1973-74, apart from other factors, the US decided they do not want to be the bearer of the world's problems as far as money is concerned, and the dollar was devalued. That means no longer was valued in terms of gold. The gold exchange standard ended, and we came into an era of fixed exchange. The gold did not matter as far as international is concerned. Now, one of the other consequences of the economic crisis was, for the first time, world trade now is mainly between developed countries, but the oil weapon was considered, for some reason, an important weapon in the hands of the third world countries. Already by the Tokyo round, which is 1970s, some kind of tension was going between developed and developing countries. The US was now saying that, look, you guys have had nothing to do because of GATT. There was no reciprocity. You could do whatever you wanted, get the benefits of the market, don't give us any markets. But you've done well now, so you've got to give something too in tariff negotiations. You've got to, all the non-reciprocity in tariff change has to come to some kind of change. But in the 70s, when they saw what the oil could do to the economy of developed countries, it showed up in the Tokyo round of GATT. And all I can, I think I don't want to go too long into that. One of the consequences of the oil crisis and the overbuilding of dollar balances between the European in the US countries was not of excessive increase in lending to Latin American countries by banks in the US, which are flush in funds. Where they get their funds from? The Arab countries were flush with dollars after the takeover of the dollar trade, of the oil trade. They put the dollar back in the US banks. Now, the US banks had a lot of dollar balances, but who to take? The developed countries were not taking them because they were in a crisis. So in fact, these went to the Latin American countries, and there were some issues in excessive lending to Latin American countries, and global trade for a while flattened out. Now, here is the political change which is emerging at the end of this round, as 1950 to 80, re-emergence of DCs other than US. Now, as a consequence of the Marshall Plan, the developed countries were becoming actually much stronger. Germany always the leader, but so also France and to a certain extent UK were emerging stronger, and they were beginning to resent the way their political alliances were being driven by the US's. So do this, don't do that. Don't deal with this in Russia, do this Russia. Don't buy this Russia. I think in many of the European countries, this is becoming a bit of a problem. So re-emerge of DCs other than the US, and then of course you had the Soviet Union bloc, the NATO, as you know, the counterpart there, of course, the Warsaw Pact, and these really very nicely established a Cold War in terms of both economics and politics between the two sets of countries. So the USA driving the Western blocs beginning to resent some of the overbearing relationship with USA, and they were also seeing their own economic strength increasing. Now, here is where I'm going to talk about what emerged very clearly to me, at least, was the democratic dividend. Now, I give us example of the best. Democratic dividend means if you don't want to do something in economics, you can use your politics to trade off. That's what it means. For example, India's economic help during the famine, in 1960s famine, the PL 480, who gave us wheat? US. That it turned out to be expensive later on, not the issue, but they were the ones who came forward, even though India was not in particularly well-known political relationship with the US for lots of reasons. We all know what Indira Gandhi, what Kissinger and Nixon used to think about Indira Gandhi. We won't go into that. There was the political war. The other issue was the China war. Once again, it was the US which did come to help. Now, this was happening even though at that time the Soviet Union, because of economic reasons, was much closer to us politically than the US. Now, yet, I still believe, and I think most observers I've seen believe, that this was because of the fact that countries like the USA could not afford countries like India to slip into what they would call the anti-democratic forces. So democracy and anti-democracy became the same thing as capitalism and communism, which of course they aren't, but that was the perception. So that is what I say was the beauty of this democratic dividend that we had, that we could trade off our desire to be a democracy instantly. And if you may not agree, I think that's still true today. Our biggest strength is the fact that we are a soft power and we are a democratic country. Now, so this democratic dividend that we had could be used to trade off which economics and politics, which was being created in the middle of the Cold War. So this is what was a very, very nicely established kind of, if I call it, equilibrium between politics and economics. In fact, many of the reasons why developing countries could go slow in the Tokyo round. In fact, many people call the Tokyo round the developing country round, which made no sense. The economic power of the developing country was zero in 1979, 73 to 79, yet they were considered very important because of the control of oil, which many thought in the Western country thought could be used for other economic things. So that was a very useful kind of trade-off to have. Now let me quickly run to the next phase two, which economics phase. It begins post-80. What's happened? There's a strong political and economic bloc based on Comecon, and there's a growing economic bloc based on the US. Only thing is the contradictions of growing countries not wanting to resist the pushiness of the US was coming up in the 80s, mainly in Europe. So response of DCs to the oil crisis. Now here is where this sad thing that the oil crisis was never used by developing countries the way it could have been. Enormous improvement because the Arab countries did not understand the complications of raising oil so quickly. They do it today. There was huge improvement in energy efficiency. Let me tell you how effective it was. Price of oil in nominal terms fell from around 30 plus in 1979 to $12.92. And you see this disappearance of what I call the oil weapon. in the hands of developing countries. There was a major recovery in the US after the recession of the early 80s. The WTO now emerges. New players emerge. GATT was only about trade in commodities. Now the TNCs have emerged as new players because they dominate the world trade. Similarly, there is the invention of internet, which made communication improve phenomenally. And during what is called the seventh, eighth round, which I don't know when it ended, sort of ended some point. During that round, it was very clear that the USA and the developed countries slowly bringing more and more restrictions on the developing countries in terms of how they would respond to negotiations WTO. No longer could developing countries ignore this. Now, I won't go into WTO as a whole topic by itself. Let me make one thing clear. In the 1995 agreement in the WTO, it was one clause that was put in was something called the single undertaking clause. Single undertaking clause. What it meant was anyone who subscribes to an agricultural agreement in the WTO is automatically party to every agreement, including TRIPS, TRIMS, service agreement, agriculture agreement with some modification. So it means single undertaking. You are either you take it all or leave it. You could not be partially part of the world trading arrangement. You can't say I'm only interested in industrial goods. It's take one or take none. This was a big change. Similarly, single undertaking meant that for some time at least, this non-reciprocity will not be there. You can't just do whatever you want and no one's going to respond to you. That's going to go. And of course, you see the growth of RTAs where countries started working. So here is you feel the end of the oil prices, end of the oil weapon you see, and emerging once again, the growing distrust or growing conflicts between the developed and the developing countries, at least those in the non-communist sphere. Now, political changes at this time. So that's the again the shift in the economic balance. Political changes are even more significant. And I have asked many, well, this is a people historical job, not mine. I never understood why Gorbachev was sitting so pretty in 1986-87. I think when he announced the perestroika and then the breakup in 93, he was in good terms with all the Western players. They thought he was a good guy. He thought they was a good guy. He was quite a king at home. At least in the 80s, I did not see all the growing tensions within the Soviet Union. Why he decided to unilaterally give up and say, okay, end of all this. End of this Soviet Union, everyone now go on their own. And then you know what happened, the emergence of all the players in East Asia. Now look what it does. What complications one thing that I'm just talking about Soviet Union. I'll come to China after that. Look what this one little thing does. In the 80s, as I said, countries like Germany, France, UK, well, Germany, France in particular, began to strongly resent the pushy nature of the US economy. Don't kind do this. Wanting these countries to follow the US in all issues in the UN. And one of the things they realized was the strength of the US lies in the economics. And they're a large country of 200 million those days, still more now. And these are small countries. So then began the process of enlarging what was called the earlier European Union, Europe to become a larger Europe and go into the European Union, which is a very big thing. The European Union means technically they are one country. And this business had begun in the 80s, when they had started talking to each other and resenting a little bit more or making known the resentment to many of the requirements which the US was citing, till they come to this business of the breakup of Soviet Union. So what they realized was the US is now growing, trying to build the economic power by moving down south into the Latin American belt. They felt this meant that they should also move east and bring in the developing countries. The developed countries of the European Union must form into one country, which will become the European Union, and which will then become a strong economic counterforce to the US. What happens? When the Soviet Union breaks, then suddenly the feeling is insecurity on the east. Suddenly the worry about US becoming emergent US power, economic power in the West, that becomes not as important. What becomes more important is how to ensure security in the East. because the emergence of new players like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, etc., etc. And therefore, the whole logic of the EU was changed from EU 15 was to now become EU 27 over the next 10 years between 93 and 2003, where it became one big European Union. So they had to subserve, they had to sort of, in a sense, for a moment, suppress the economic, if you want to call it, ambitions against US in favor of this Eastern Security Alliance to keep the European Union intact. That's the one thing. Now, on the other hand, we have this emergence in 1980. The other thing which I have never understood, because everyone keeps saying China is such a great country. What did they do? What did they do? Now, I don't see what they did till 1990. Well, let me tell you a point. In the 1979, this China had nothing. They did no trade, hardly any trade. In fact, they just before that, they preceded that go back to the villages movement, that, all this going back to the villages, you all know that cultural problem. Now in 79, Deng Xiaoping comes and says, I'm going to open the Chinese economy. That's fair enough. But show me a country which is historically hardly ever engaged in serious industrial trade and in 5 or 6 years become the dominant power in world trade. Is that ever happened? Impossible. Trade doesn't mean, okay, today I'm going to start exporting. It's a complicated combination of establishing banking channels, of establishing trust between buyers and sellers. So many issues. You don't just become a great exporter or trader overnight if you're a large country. What happened in China, as far as I'm aware, and that's a complete different lecture by itself. In the 1980s, the US was beginning to assert itself against many of these countries that emerged after WTO. And one thing they said was, they said those countries which were getting special treatment from us under the GSTP, the Generalized Scheme of Tariff Preferences, which are getting less than MFN tariff benefits from us, are going to lose them because they have become rich. They've gone over the 1,000 per capita dollar. Who are the countries who lost this special tariff preferences? Remember, in the 80s, USA tariffs were still pretty high. Who are these countries? Taiwan, one. Most important, Singapore. South Korea. I was in fact visiting Singapore University here as a faculty in 1988. And they were so upset in losing the Chinese market that the Prime Minister and the other minister went to the White House to meet the president and didn't give them a meeting. And so there's nothing to discuss. This is part of the game. You are now big countries. You've got to stand up for your own. So many of these countries want to re-emerge and become a different kind of trader with China. Most of these countries, including South Korea and Japan, actually were trading with the US through China. As evidence, you can see throughout the 1980s and 90s and even 2000, all these East Asian countries always had a trade surplus with China. So effectively, China had become the assembly ground for whatever was happening individually in these countries. So that was the basis of which Joe started driving China. Let me not go to China issue more, but I don't think it was something tremendous that they did in the 1979, but tremendous things they did after 1990s. Yes, I'm willing to. Now, the difference was that when China started emerging in the 90s, and 90s they were a considerable, a very major market force by the mid-90s. What was different? The difference was, here's a new emerging economic power. And the World Bank has been keeping on trying to look at new methods of, there was the old Anne Kreuger business about markets, that markets being the force to drive countries slowly gave up. Then they say now we have the East Asian example, what is called the state-driven, register-driven models of growth. That failed because the failed, in the 1997, when the East Asian countries went into a, free fall. That would disappear, that these countries might emerge as the next economic force to counter the US. The feeling was that the EU was likely in the late 90s to be the most important force to oppose US and create a new kind of economic sort of bulwark, so that some kind of trade-off could be observed in political relationships. Unfortunately, we know what happened to the European countries since then. They had their own internal contradictions. The feeling was that the Chinese could be the new force, that the China could be the basis of a new Cold War, where they have these two opposing economic forces, but you can keep them played one against the other so that you can get some political leeway in various fora. Unfortunately, the Chinese dominance is based on free markets and trade with the US. I will never forget 2006 in a WTO meeting in Jordan. And this, I was talking about WTO, why it's not working. And this Chinese delegate, so he had said very interesting. He's the reason WTO is not working is because we are not letting the USA control it. Saying let the USA run the WTO and the trade will flourish because Chinese dominance was based on free markets. The Chinese internal political model itself depended on free markets. And that free market had to be US, which is the only dominant economic force. So how could we expect the Chinese to oppose them? You can see, as far as I'm aware, I've never seen the Chinese actually opposing USA in very serious issues in economics, certainly not. And I'm convinced that the idea is that both are trying to tell the Soviet Union, look, just let's get rid of the Ukraine thing fast soon. Let's get back to the world of economics because it matters both for China and the US. China and the US at the moment are very strongly bound together, and I do not believe that the economic antagonism is going to last very long. Anyway, so the feeling was that a Cold War based on Chinese dominance in the economic markets is not going to happen because the Chinese dominance itself is based on working with the US because they depend on the US markets. Now, the plan for the EU was as a possible Cold War force economic response to NAFTA. That was why the EU was set up, the economic objective. NAFTA is becoming strong based on US. We'll become strong based on EU. But the security issues took over. And then the internal contradictions of developing East European countries and highly developed West European countries soon came to the fore, and the EU failed to be a possible thing. So declined economic power of LDCs, as I said in the second phase, showed up in the WTO. Now to summarize these so many things I've said, what have I said? That basically the Cold War ended with the Soviet Union and nothing new is emerging. The Cold War was an important factor creating this demographic dividend where countries like India, which are poor, would say, look, we are poor, but we are still democratic. You got to let us not do this. Don't make us do this. Don't make it. That's gone. That's really the point I'm trying to make. And the possibility that someone like the like the European Union or China could emerge as other countervailing force, that's also gone based on the circumstances of these particular countries. Now, in this phase two, you have US frictions, threat to unipolar. Lots of things are happening. Decline aid is replaced now by FDI. Main point, unlike in the Cold War, cannot play the democratic dividend card. China not willing to take the kind of role that Soviet Union did. They are not because their internal system itself is based on the economic development, which is not true in the Soviet Union. Soviet Union's strength was based on their military strength, not the economic strength. They're still a poor economic power today, but China is not. So it's not the same. Anyway, let me quickly end the trade part. Trends in trade, 1980-2007, growth of world trade higher than previous boom. Almost all countries now are part of WTO, which is really a one-way traffic at the moment. International regulations, non-economic restrictions on trade, so forward, or is in a position to come forward and balance. The US literally drives things right through. I've heard since, I must tell you, just as a slight joke, since 1998, I've been to at least 20 seminars where, especially those who come from the World Bank, keep telling me the dollar is going into free fall. I don't think I think I'll be gone before the free fall ever happens. This demise of the dollar is something which people don't understand. Finance keep talking about. Anyway, in the recession now in 2008 is then what I call the new phase. Because after 2008 was the first time that we had at least some kind of recession like the 1930s, because our GDP fell by 1%, which has never happened. Trade fell by about 20% in that time, but WTO held on. It's interesting to see after 2008, 2009, 2010, most countries did not raise their tariffs. May not have lowered them, but no one raised tariffs. Weak recovery in LDCs, none in US, most robust US. Are we back on unipolar world? impact on foreign policy. Let me quickly go through. So what are the alternative poles? EU, China, Russia. None of these emerge to me. Most likely to me seems to be Russia, but too weak in terms of economics. And we are seeing this search for poles is also this lack of a kind of a trade-off between political economics is seeing the search for poles where many of the RTAs, for example, as I've always maintained, all RTAs in India till 2012 are political RTAs. As the late, as not late, as Mr. Manmohan himself said, yes, ASEAN was a political RTA. It was not an economic RTA. So to fight and say ASEAN gave us no benefits, which I was saying at that time, was a waste of time. Now I think we're getting into more economic time, but these RTAs themselves reflect people looking at political formations to sign up with, given the fact that then we have a quick factor which I won't mention, hopefully we will not have to mention later, the Trump factor, which of course throws everything into kilter. We don't know what this fellow is going to do. He's a biggest unguided missile I've ever seen. US-China trade war issue is economics, not politics. I'm absolutely clear. They are not fighting a political game, whereas we are looking for these countries to fight a political game, which they are not. Now, looking at from 2002, is a new Cold War emerging? I say no. Chinese interest is not political, unlike Putin. Putin, the war survived. I understand his point. But for China, it's not survived. For them, it's important to get back to the old economic relations because that is important for their domestic survival. So why do developing countries matter? And I'm mentioning this article, series of articles in the BE Journal of Theoretical Economics, and then one in the International Economics 2020. And one of the things what I see, this is just new, that the democratic dividend is gone. There is no such thing anymore as democratic dividend. You're not going to go anywhere, given that economics matters. And the DC should be dominating, but they're not. It's interesting to me that people keep saying India is the place to be, India is the place to be, but then I come back to Delhi and I see the average income is 16,000 rupees per month. And Delhi is a rich state. So where is this India coming from? Where? Uh, now look at now I'm going to quickly go to the last part where I come to the demographic dividend is a new thing instead of the democratic dividend, and that is the paradigm of economics and the role of time. And I'm going to go through very quickly on this. Typical production or function economics, there are two things which matter: capital and labor. Both capital and labor together combine to create output. But on the consumption side, there is only L. And technology today, you've heard the stories of the IT, so easily bypassing labor. So today, productivity is not limited by the amount of labor. You can substitute for labor in, but the problem is, how do you substitute for consumption? So there's no limit on why, because technology can do everything, but where are the buyers? And let me tell you, most important, the main point is consumption requires not only income, which is what Keynes said, but time. And let me make it have a facile way of saying it is that suppose I gave you 1,000,000 rupees and said spend it in 3 days. You can't do it. There are only so many chapatis you can eat, only so many houses you can do. And even if you buy all that, typically remember every time you buy something, you keep asking yourself, when will I use this? So in fact, technology today takes the form of trying to make time converge. So the telephone becomes the telephone and television together become something else. I don't know what, maybe they'll become a car one day. Idea is that we have limited time, 24 hours, but consumption limits, products are increasing. Technology has no limit. It's creating more and more products. But on the consumption side, we have no time because we have only 24 hours. Now, this time has never got a role in economics. Only one set of people worked on this in 2005, 2006 onward. For them, time was a way to explain outsourcing. Time was a way by which you can forget about what you're maximizing, not the productivity of a worker, but the productivity of 1 hour, which is why India was so convenient. When they sleep in the West, we wake up. When we sleep, they wake up. So you can maximize the use of 24 hours time. But even that is only on the production side. What about consumption? Unfortunately, we cannot substitute consumption. I can't say, Alka, please, can you have few more rotis on my behalf? I don't want to have. We cannot outsource consumption physical terms. Now, here you can see the guy who knows great empirical economics, but I don't think he knows any economic theory as such. and Ruchir Sharma. He's been writing books after books saying no economy grows fast in labor force. He's got tomes he's written on saying why no economy has ever grown fast in labor force, but he doesn't say why. And I think what we have shown, in fact, in the BE paper, BE technology paper, is that it is with that labor is now important not only on the production side, but on the consumption side. In fact, the only thing which matters till you have robots one day which say, look, I need my daily grease. Till then, you have to have labor to consume. And that is the problem. Except I don't have the graph here. Today, if you look at it till 2040 or 35, the only countries with a growing consuming labor force in this period are India and the US, no one else. Everywhere else, they're already falling into a decline. And which is why you can see recession almost every country that you can think about, except maybe India, USA, and one or two others. Now, most recent recession path, we see technological development. So what I'm trying to point out is the developing countries, for historical reasons, not that we ever planned it. In fact, we are trying to plan the opposite. The developing countries are where all the labor is. The developed countries are where all the capital is. Unfortunately, there is no trade theory which tells us how can capital and labor be, what can make a substitution for movement of capital labor. We don't have. We have Hexagon theorem for commodities and movement. We have the Ricardian theorem. It tells us how productivity can move between countries, but we have nothing which shows how uh, foreign investment can move or technology can move from the place where it exists to the place where there is a demand for it. And this is where I believe the search is on. I believe FDI is the only force. The other force, of course, is developed countries will periodically will continue to increase immigration despite what they say. Really believe that most developed countries are actually reducing their requirements of immigration. They, of course, claim it is for the purpose of production, but I think I know better. And in fact, it is clear. One indication is I've looked at the Canadian thing. I didn't have time to do all this. You can see in the last 5 years, they have reduced, except in last year, they have reduced their points required to qualify for immigration to such a level that one day they might well say zero. But they can't say zero because then there'll be a political furor that you're allowing labor to come. But I do believe it's not just skilled labor, that's not the problem. The problem labor itself. And I think that's where the strength of the developing countries lies. Why is India the most important? Only
Another
ones who have a growing
another two
life.
minutes, Manoj.
Okay, I'm going to wind up with that. Uh, I believe many countries are going to have to reconsider immigration policies. I believe the labor, the poorest labor or the richest labor, whichever one you want, is the strength which you have at the moment with declining aging populations everywhere. I think I'll stop with that. And I think now we have the democratic dividend replaced by the demographic dividend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manoj. I was a bit intrigued by the topic that you suggested, but having heard you now, I get the sense of what you're trying to say. I first of all agree with your basic proposition that the nature of the global system today is fundamentally different from that of the Cold War, that it's not a political standoff between, it's not a geopolitical contest as much as it is a geoeconomic contest. That China is not challenging the United States in a geopolitical manner in which the Soviet Union did, and that the relationship between China and the United States remains very complex, and therefore the Chinese are going to be quite careful in managing the relationship, as indeed I believe the Americans are going to be. So this is one fundamental proposition of yours with which I entirely agree, and which is something which a lot of pure geopolitical analysts who don't understand economics don't seem to get, because they are looking at the politics of the U.S.-China kind of rivalry, and not understanding the complex nature of the economic interaction.
Absolutely.
Which is another reason I've always argued in the recent past that I don't see any immediate conflict on Taiwan in the manner in which Ukraine became
Agreed.
a
Agreed.
hotspot. So I think that's a very important distinction you make between the earlier era and the present era. The second, I think, important point, which I completely endorse, is the structural change in the global economy in terms of the relationship between capital and labor. That we have now increasing out migration. And uh, in fact, there's something I'm working on right now, looking at the numbers eh, from an Indian point of view. There has been a huge amount of out migration, legal and illegal.
Mhm.
Last year, the media reported 97,000 illegal migrants from India to the United States, right? And of course, as you said, Canada, US, they're all making it easier for legal migration. And so are many other countries. I mean, for example, Japan is now spending money on teaching Japanese to Indians for
New Zealand.
Indians to be able to go to Japan. All
New
labor,
Zealand.
pardon?
New Zealand has also opened up its
No, no,
immigration.
New Zealand is English, Australia, I mean, the English speaking world, of course, is open to Indians, but even the non English speaking countries, and just this morning, the media reported that Germany last year attracted the largest number of Indian
Absolutely.
immigrants.
Absolutely.
Incidentally, Dhruv Rathi, who is the hottest person on YouTube today, is operating out of Germany. So you can see that large numbers of Indians are all over the world, and labor is chasing opportunity. Now, having said all that, I think um, I would emphasize from an Indian perspective that this is a worrisome situation for us.
Of course it is. I agree.
I think you do suggest that, but I didn't get the emphasis adequately. This is an extremely worrying situation for us. And the demographic dividend that we all spoke about even a decade back hasn't fructified. In fact, if anything, the demographic dividend is benefiting other countries
Absolutely.
because of the outflow of talented labor, skilled, semi-skilled, highly skilled, etc. So, um, very interesting. I learned a lot from you, and I'm glad that we are, in a sense, agreed on your two basic propositions. I will now open up for questions. There are 22 participants I can see listed here.
If I can take 2 minutes to add one thing.
Sure, sure.
Just, one of the things I really want to spend more was the part which I have done, which is, I think, unique to me in economics. See, what struck me there was this video, which I'm sure all your viewers have seen doing the rounds for the last 3 years. There's this guy who walks into this Apple store, Amazon store, and there's no one inside. It's empty. And he has an Amazon Pay account. He enters and that enters. And whenever he picks up something, it's automatically debited from his Amazon Pay account and leaves. Which seems to be the ultimate what technology can do. But what struck me then was, what happens if no one enters? That's what got me striking. And of course, Sanjay, I mean, I don't think you're doing so much the mainframe economics. It took me 2 years to work out the mathematical framework of it. Really difficult. It was so difficult. And RA really helped me, where I could prove this point that technology developing by itself can never lead to a sustainable development unless it marries with the labor. But the labor it cannot marry because labor is somewhere else. Anyway, yeah, go on. I can't hear you.
I said I don't see any questions in the chat box. So if there anyone asking a question, well, if there are no questions as yet from the participants, let me ask you the first question,
Please.
which is what does all of this suggest, from since you're a trade policy expert, for us? For what should be the lesson or the message for Indian trade policy? Because in a sense, we are neither here nor there. I mean, we have opted out of regional trade agreements. We are not part of any major regional trade agreement. I find we are still unable to strike an agreement with UK and EU. We have a very superficial agreement with Canada and Australia. So therefore, on the bilateral, regional, or plurilateral agreements, we are still nowhere. On the multilateral, nothing is moving. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think WTO is in
it's in standstill. It's in standstill.
So where do we go from here?
Okay, I'm very clear about this. You see, there is a separate relationship in trade, which, I still go to Ministry of Commerce advisor. You guys have to understand these FDI and trade are not two different things. FDI is nothing but trade done by different ways. FDI is a combination of commodities, services, and technology. Now you understand that you need technology. You understand don't really have it. Now you can keep saying that we are going to become the greatest makers of chips in the next 2 years. That's not going to happen. So this is all political stuff. So the realistic policy to bridge the gap between trade and where we are is nowhere. As you know, in trade, we are nowhere. Is to actually be very liberal to FDI in general. Right? I'm not saying you give up your rules and do whatever, violate. FDI to me is the answer. And I have a book which I have written on this, on FDI in India, etc. I've shown, looking at many countries, including China, there are no two sets of countries where if you plot bilateral trade on one axis and bilateral FDI on the other axis, it is not an almost one-to-one relationship. How is one-to-one. One is China for reasons you know best. You won't allow FDI, and the other is Mauritius, which for there is no FDI for Mauritius. Except for these two cases, in no cases is it violated. Look at the one fact: our major FDI today is in place countries like UK and USA, which are our major trading partners, not surprising at all. So I say remove the distinction, which is not easy to know. You also mean the government. One is GPIT, one is Ministry of Commerce, and never the twain shall meet. And I keep saying at every meeting that you guys are talking nonsense. You cannot run trade like this. You will neither go on export front, nor you do well the other. Eliminate the distinction. Technology will have to come to India, but where will it go? You can't stop technology. One of the things is the old proposition in trade is technology is on a self-creating path. You can't stop it. AI is not something anyone can stop. But if it creates products, who will consume them? Someone has to consume, right? And that's where they will have to come to India. It's not surprising to me, but you've got to stop creating this distinction, bureaucratic distinction between trade and FDI. I believe that's the only way to do it. In fact, I have a PhD student who's just finished PhD with me when we show a very interesting proposition, theoretical proposition, Sanjay, which says that if you have an RTA and if you have an RTA and you allow FTA, if you reduce tariffs because of the RTA, then any company which was here earlier, a multinational, will leave the country unless you have investment provisions. So if you set up an RTA without investment provisions, then countries which are here earlier for historical reasons will actually leave the country. So you should not negotiate a trade agreement without an investment service. I think they do listen. The new Commerce Secretary is a smart guy. I think maybe because he's done economics in JNU, he's a smart guy. And he understands about how much can you, I think we've got to change the trade minister at some point of time because he's a smart guy who doesn't understand economics at all. It's in the world today, Sanjay, you can't ignore economics. It comes out. In the earlier nice world of the democratic dividend, you could. You could become democratic. But today it isn't there. I still believe we have a little soft spot in the world's mind because we are still a democracy, and I think matters. The day we make it clear that we are not, this is where we're gone.
That soft
So I
spot is
believe I believe improving FDI relations with India, with other countries, letting them come in a very transparent manner is the way to go.
well, first of all, if you look at policy action, it's been the opposite direction. We have, terminated BITs, bilateral investment treaties, and we are refusing to, in fact, link trade policy to investment policy. Even in WTO, we are not willing to talk about investment policy, etc., etc.
There is only one place, Sanjay. One place, Sanjay, where I think I had little effect. The recent agreement they had with the I think was it Canada or with who? With
maybe Australia.
Not Australia. The recent one we had with Ireland, I think. Oh, I forget. No. The one EU. The one EU. The one in Switzerland. The one in Switzerland. They have said they're not Switzerland, but their group, Switzerland, Sweden, and that little group. And they have said that the FDI is a condition for trade. First time I'm hearing. I've never heard of a WTO agreement which is so stupid, which says so much FDI must come. If that comes, we will give you concessions, but if it doesn't come, we'll withdraw concessions. Now, the last part I wrote about in Mint also. I said the last part is a joke. If after 50 years...
Alka has a question.
Yeah, please, Alka.
Alka.
Right. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So I now am going to force China onto the scene
Mhm.
because some very interesting, almost it was like counterintuitive kind of conclusions that are coming. I mean, if you look at the general discourse here, and the two issues on which I would like to get, because while you were unfolding your argument, it seemed to make ample sense. But the first question is with this ratio between capital and labor, and you're saying that you may get capital, but labor is the problem, and that's as far as the developed countries are concerned. We have labor, but we cannot encash the demographic
Yeah,
dividend
we don't have
because
capital.
we do not consume. Now, this seems to me again upending the conventional wisdom on its head, because if we are arguing that we have these huge numbers, so surely our technological levels are not reached that point where consumption is a problem. We are not producing that kind of technology
Correct.
as yet. So you don't have a problem with consumption.
So we don't have a
China,
problem here.
so no, but then the China has the other also issue. And one of your conclusions was that there is a problem of consumption in China.
Everywhere.
So how do you compare India and China? Because what I have seen in the last 3 years, if there's anything the Chinese are doing is to push the envelope as far as increasing the consumption base. And so they are preparing in one sense for
Yeah,
the kind of thing. So
yeah,
this
I'll
is
tell
the
you.
first. Okay, this is the first thing that I talked about. The second is that if you are saying conventional wisdom again, in terms of FDI is not being allowed in India, and China may be very an obvious kind of a problem about FDI.
Mhm.
But we are generally not very FDI friendly.
Mhm.
So the whole question then becomes that how is the economy going to grow beyond a point? This is not the problem with China. You still have FDI going there. They are generating enough resources. So how do you locate India as one of the fastest growing? And
Okay,
China is not really on your radar. So
I'll
give
tell you.
me
I'll tell you. Well, I'm not into this fastest growing business. I mean, that's let's leave that aside. There's no politics. But on the China part, see, China's problem is the following. They are paying for what is the you see, there's this what we call in economics, Sanjay knows about it, I'm sure. It's called the law of unintended consequences. Let me give you an example. In the 1960s, Chow Enlai and Mao Zedong were absolutely paranoid about the bamboo cuts. And one day these buggers are going to come. It's a huge country that take us over. So they said, forget about the roads in Beijing. You strengthen the roads going to the ports. Made no sense at that time. Those roads became extremely useful when they actually started trading in the 80s, but they never planned it for trade. That's one. Secondly, if you look at China, the problem is the following. Let's face it, the political system has to be a given. The political system has to be a given. It cannot be something which is not going to, anyone will be willing to accept what is happening in China today in terms of the way people think of the liberty or whatever. Their problem is they went in for a one-child policy, and now they are very top-heavy. Now, Alka, when I was 20, 25, the kind of consumption I can do, you cannot make me do today. I'm just not made that way. So their problem is aging population. The two things, one, numbers and the demographic composition. The largest number of people in the 15 to 40 age group today lie in the USA and India. I have the graph to show it. This is the thing. The consuming populations here, they may force. Same Japan, same problem Japan. They keep raising the retirement age, but that does not give time. Persons still, and the people at that retirement age do not consume the kinds of things which technology today is creating. So that's the problem with China. China needs consumers outside. China needs the US at the moment in terms of economics more than the US needs China. There's no doubt about that. And they know it, and they're very clear about it. The good thing is they know where they are and they're very clear. We don't know where we are and we're not very clear. That's what worries me. So we think we are still the greatest superpower. We'll become third, fourth, fifth greatest, whatever. I don't know. I don't see how that. But I'm just saying the difference in India and China is the prospects for growing in the next 20 years of this consumption-related global force is high in India than it is China. That's where I think they feel that the Indian markets offers more to them than the Chinese does. Not from a technological point of view. China has a technological leadership. That's not the problem. I'm not worried about the fact that the US has a technology leadership over India. I don't care about that. But I have a democratic leadership which they can't do anything about. See, the beauty of demographics, you can't do anything about it. It's there. It's there, it's just there. And what was fascinating to me was the example I just told Sanjay, you must have heard about it, was exactly this. I said, all these videos doing the round, if no one enters the store, then what's going to happen to Amazon? Great technology, self-sustained, same self-sustained car, autonomous cars, great
Okay,
invention,
I'm
but there's
going,
no,
yeah, I'm going to interrupt you and take another question since we
yeah,
don't have
please,
too much time left.
please.
This is from Priyanka Yadav,
Yeah,
who's from JNU. The question
There's
is,
one
though,
before that, Sanjay, one before.
I know, I'll come back. That's to me.
Okay.
I'll address it later. This question is to our speaker. And the question is that post 2008, the South-South cooperation has increased in terms of trade. However, South-South cooperation is decreasing in terms of geostrategic aspects, and she refers to India, Maldives, India-China relations. So what kind of repercussions does it have on India's foreign policy? If you'd like to answer that.
yeah. Well, first of all, when I said that the South-South trade is increasing, you're right. China was a major part of that South-South China trade, but not Maldives. Maldives certainly wasn't. And to think of what's happening in Maldives, a deterioration in our international relation would be a you're not giving enough credit to India for that. Then I think we shouldn't worry too much about what Maldives does or does not think about. As far as the South-South countries, let me tell you, India is in. You'll see it emerging in trade soon. We'll soon start seeing a lot more trade agreements coming up with Latin American countries, and our economic relationship with both the Latin American political and African countries improving, not reducing. So, except for China, which is the, what do you call it, the bull in the China shop, whatever, except for China, because the political system, I do believe that the South-South trade is a part of the growing economic political relationship between these countries. I don't think that there is any contradiction in that. So except for China, and even China, I am one of those guys who says if India should say, let's put our money where our mouth is. China wants to improve relations. Let's have a trade agreement. Forget this subterfuge of the ASEAN and the other agreement. Let's sit and do a trade agreement. They will never do it. Because the minute you say we're going to have movement of services, which by the way is something I've been saying for 20 years, and I'm glad to see the government of India doing it. Today, services, agreements, though difficult to make, are coming into every agreement, which is a good thing. Let me see China agreeing on that. So they should, instead of saying we don't want it, they should hold China straight for say, okay, you guys, let's sit one on one and have a trade agreement. You will see a different story from the Chinese. So I believe South-South trade has followed the path of political thing.
Good. Well, there's a question to me about demographic dividend and migration. The question is, if you don't allow these people to go out of the country, India will have a problem of a lot of unemployed. Frankly, that's one way of looking at it. I'd rather that they stay here and create enough of a problem that governments create jobs. But it is true that migration is a escape valve. It's like taking the top of the pressure cooker. And it portrays us in a very pathetic way. I mean,
Yeah.
we are now a democracy that exports labor to Israel, to Ukraine, to all over the world. I mean, this is pathetic.
It's also a failure of education system.
It is a failure of our education. It's a failure of our economy. It's not
Yes.
a great thing that Indians are
No,
finding jobs all over the world. So,
no. I agree
uh,
there. I have
yeah.
no two ways. I agree there.
So
I think
I was just replying to a question on
I
this.
think Alka has one more.
There's one question. I will come in with one more. Yeah, Alka, go ahead.
All right. So if there is nobody else now, see, the other thing is there are again, I mean, in the sense that I'm sure you obviously will explain, but seemingly two paradoxical propositions that on the one, so I'd like to see how do you look at the next decade now. On the one hand, you are saying South-South trade is on an increasing graph. Okay,
Yes.
and here is where we see China also positioning itself to move into this particular sphere. But you are saying that you are suggesting that US and China seem to be joined at the hip and that there is really no getting away from each other for some time. What is the trend here? Because we too are not a very significant player as far as South is concerned. So how is the longer trend going to work out, both in terms of India and China vis-a-vis the global South?
So you must separate the political political sort of meaning of South and economic meaning of South. Let me explain. You see, if India Latin America trade is increasing, it does not necessarily mean only Indian and Latin American governments are trading. These traders are part of a global trading chain. Today, there's no such thing. For example, I'll tell you, there is no such thing as my car. See, we are the only ones who still think we'll one day. There was one guy in India who thought he'll make his own car. Look what happened to it. There's only one other case I know in history where some countries said they'll make their own car, Malaysia. They said they'll make a car called the Proton. It lasted exactly 2 years, and then they stopped it, and then they went to collapsing Volkswagen. Today, there's no such thing as a product being made in any one country. The Americans don't make anything, you know that, but they buy everything. So first of all, trade is only a way of facilitating exchange, but the exchange does not have to be only because these countries were involved in it. So it is these global players, whether sitting in India or sitting in the USA or sitting in Germany or sitting in China, who will ensure that this trade is taking place. But I'm saying this trade is taking place, but that's where the consuming cohorts are. That does not necessarily mean these are the two countries making the trade happen. You get the point? I don't know if it's the distinction. It's the consumption part you are seeing when you're seeing trade.
Absolutely.
But the production part does not necessarily have to lie only in these countries. It could be anywhere. Because who makes Toyota cars? Japan. But what is there? Toyota Japan, there's Toyota Malaysia, there's Toyota Latin, everything. So it's, economics is like water today. It spreads out to wherever it works. Politics is not. Politics is not like water. It sort of gets stuck in countries' own personal things. I believe that today countries cannot look only at political relationships.
We end on that. We have run out of time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. And I think for those of you who are hearing, particularly those of your students at SIS, I think this is extremely important to recognize the kind of distinction that Professor Pant makes between the nature of geoeconomic relations and geopolitical relations.
Absolutely.
That at the end of the day, the trade relations, and this has become far more important with China because the US-China relationship has been both geopolitical and geoeconomic, but neither of them is able to escape the consequences of the economic interface that exists. And we in India are beginning to discover this after having spoken tough on China for some time now. Our trade with China continues to rise. And I think once these elections are over and there's a new government, my guess would be that there has to be some movement forward on the India-China trade relationship. Maybe
I can make one.
Yeah, sure.
One last thing and add to this. If you want Indo-China trade deficit decline very fast, open your US, open Chinese foreign investment in India. It will stop in no time.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's a different thing.
Incidentally, and that will be the last word. This is what Jaishankar used to tell me when he was India's ambassador to China. But
but he wears a number of hats now.
So thank you very much, ICS, and over to you, ICS.
Thank you, Chair. I seek your permission to formally bring an end to today's session.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj.
Bye, Sanjay. Bye.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, go on, please.
With this, we conclude the session and express our gratitude to Professor Pant and Dr. Baru for generously sharing their time with us. Today's discussion video will be accessible on the ICS YouTube platform. We extend a warm invitation to all for the upcoming panel discussion to commemorate the centenary of Rabindranath Tagore's visit to China. Details about the event can be found on the ICS website, or you can subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you.